All right, hello everyone. My name is Andrew Parnell, also known as Telemoks from Tuesday Night Eternal. Welcome back for another Expedition deck tech here. Wanted to go through another one today. We covered Cultist last time, and I want to talk through my second favorite deck of the format, which is Hooru Aegis. Before we get into the card by card, I want to go through a couple things about the deck because there's a couple different ways to build the Hooru deck, especially with some of the changes that came last week to the new cards to Expedition. So there's kind of three different versions and ways you can take it, and I want to talk through that before going through the card by card. So the first version, which put 2 copies into the top 8 of the ECQ, actually 2 copies in the top 4 of the ECQ a couple weeks back, was more aggro focused. So it was an aggro deck. It was a tempo deck. It had a lot of the Aegis units. It had Daring Griffin, and you basically played out cheap, resilient units and then pumped them up with combat tricks and weapons and other spells to get through damage, to push through, and then use Daring Griffin or other tools to be able to get that final push through. That's a very successful deck. It's pretty powerful. It can kind of go toe-to-toe with the aggro decks because you have a lot of cheap units, but then because of the Aegis and because of Daring Griffin and some other tools, you also have the ability to protect yourself from the late game. The control decks are pretty good matchups for you, and you also have the ability to have game against the Cultist deck. And I think that's probably the main reason if you want to play this deck. I still think that the Cultist deck is the best deck in the format at the moment, but if for some reason you don't want to play that, you want to play something different, I think this is a good option because it allows you to have pretty good game against most of the format, and you can compete against the Cultist deck. I wouldn't say you're favored. I think that the Cultist deck is still favored slightly in the matchup, but of all the decks against Cultists, I think this gives you a pretty good chance because you have some Aegis to protect against their removal, and you have a clock that you can put on with a lot of these units. Okay, so that was kind of the first version that I just talked through there, but there were some new cards introduced last week that allow you to make some changes and build this in a slightly different way. So the next one of these cards is probably the biggest one, is Hooru Pacifier, and Sodi Wingbreaker being the second one. Hooru Pacifier, a 3/4 flying overwhelm, and weapons can't be played. So this is pretty effective because it shuts down your opponent's weapons. It really shuts down the Mastery, the Stone Scar decks that rely on those weapons to push through damage. And notably, it also shuts off Exalted, because the way that Exalted works is when the unit dies, it puts a unit on, which Hooru Pacifier shuts off. So it's pretty effective at that. Also, a 3/4 flying overall body for 3 is nothing to sneeze at. So this deck is extremely this card is extremely powerful, but it's a little bit at odds with the rest of the deck. So especially the first version where you're playing a lot of weapons and you're playing a lot of Exalted, it's a little awkward because it shuts down a lot of your tools as well. So you kind of have to make a decision where if you want to play Hooru Pacifier in the deck and get its raw power, you have to make other considerations by probably taking out some of the weapons, and relying more on combat tricks and more power from your units than to rely on the weapons. Now, it's interesting with Daring Griffin because it also shuts off the Exalted from Daring Griffin if you have them out on the same time. Now, I think that Daring Griffin is a powerful enough effect, and if the game is going away where you have Hooru Pacifier out, you're in pretty good shape. And so I don't think it's the end of the world that it shuts off the Exalted from Daring Griffin. I think it's possible that these 2 cards are just so powerful that even though they don't play nice together, it's still correct to have both of them in the deck. I think that's something that hasn't really been proven out yet, but I would not be surprised if, even though they don't play well together, it's actually right to have both of them in the deck. But you do need to make that consideration and understand when you're playing out the game that you do have a little bit of a nombo here. Then you have Sodi Wingbreaker. So Sodi is also very powerful, a 3/6 for 5. But an important onslaught ability here, if you attacked with a unit, when you play Sodi, you can deal 6 damage to an enemy unit with flying or a sight. So really effective against Cultists because it takes out Carvet. It also takes out the Xenon Temple, which is huge because those are 2 of the best cards against you. And then it also deals with pesky dragons from the Stone Scar deck, or opponents Hooru Pacifiers if you face down Hooru Pacifier on the other side. So Sodi Wingbreaker, also very powerful, of course, and then if the opponent took damage, which a lot of times they are with this deck, you get to draw a card. So pretty powerful there. Not quite as at odds with the rest of your deck as Pacifier. You can fit this in a little easier, but it is a 5 power play for a 3/6 that doesn't have protection. So it's a little bit slow for what the rest of the deck, or I should say the first version of the deck, is trying to do. I think you can add them in, but it's not the perfect card in that deck. You don't just slam 4 of and call it a day. So the first version I talked about was more aggressive, more relied on the tempo plays around Aegis and weapons. This is kind of the middle version, and this is the one we're going to be playing games with today, where you fit in Hooru Pacifier, you put in a couple Sodis, and you take out some of the weapons. Really, the only weapon left in the deck is basically the Exalted from Daring Griffin, and Ghostblade Outcast too, but more Daring Griffin. So you just got to be a little careful playing with Daring Griffin here, but this is kind of the middle ground. I think obviously there's some tweaks to this. You can change it as you see fit. But that's this version. And then the third version, I think, is if you go more of a Hooru mid-range. So if you basically take out some of the more aggressive, you take out the Ghostblade Outcast, you take out the Crown Watch Paladins, and you just play more of a mid-game strategy, and you say, okay, well, we're not going to be beating people down. We're not going to be using combat tricks as much. We're going to be relying on the power of a Hooru Pacifier. You're going to play 44 Sodi Wingbreakers. You can also play Seraph Grand Strategist as a 2-drop there. It kind of changes what the deck's trying to do, but that's another way to build the Hooru deck, is if you don't think you can be effective in the aggro version or the tempo version, you slow things down. You play Seraph, you play the full 4 of Pacifier and Sodi, and you don't worry about the weapons and combat tricks as much, and I think that's a viable deck as well. So which one of those three do you build? That's totally personal preference. I think that's up to you. It's up to the cards you have. It's up to the meta that you're expecting. It's up to your play style. You could kind of try any of those. For this version, what I'm going to talk through for the deck tech and then play a pair of games here, we're going to go through just kind of the middle version, because I think it highlights both kind of all three decks, a little bit of all three decks, so you get a feel for all of them. But of course, you can tweak this in and out as you see fit. Okay, so for this middle version, here's what we're going to go through. So you've got a pair of 1-drops here in Shenra, Unbreakable, and Ghostblade Outcast. So Shenra is kind of your premium 1-drop. This is a 2-1 for 1, and importantly, it's invulnerable to damage on your turn. So essentially, you get to attack for free with it every turn, which makes it really easy to turn on its mastery, which is 8, to give it +3/+3 in endurance, making it a 5/4 endurance that still is invulnerable to damage on your turn. So very powerful card. Notably, weapons and curses can't be played on Shenra, so you can't pump it with... You can use a combat trick, but you can't permanently add a weapon to it. Important with Daring Griffin. When we took out our weapons for Hooru Pacifier, it becomes less of an issue, but you also can't exalt it onto it, so worth noting for that. But very powerful, very hard for the opponent to deal with, and you're able to get a 5/4 endurance a lot of the games here. We'll get to Pearl's Choice here in a minute, but this gives one of your units permanent +1/+1 in Aegis. It is not a weapon, so you can give that to Shenra to help get mastery faster, protect it, give it Aegis, and it keeps those stats. One little trick, we'll talk about this, we'll talk about kind of the tricks and techniques later, but one nice thing you can do with Shenra, and it comes up more often than you'd think, is your opponent, if they have a 2-power answer to this, whether through a lot of times through a burn spell or a Vara's Favor to deal 1 damage, you can see that based on what factions they're playing. And so in some situations, the right play might be to play out your Shenra. Let's say you're on the draw and they go Stone Scar, start, pass, and then you play out your Shenra, or let's say you're on the play, I'm sorry, you play out Shenra first, they play Stone Scar, comes back to you. Sometimes, rather than play a 2-drop, if you have the option, it might be better to like play a Ghostblade Outcast and then keep up a Finest Hour. Sometimes even keeping up a Finest Hour or a Pearl's Choice anyway, and not playing out your 2-drop, because any deck that can deal with Shenra, the play style is that they're going to go for it as soon as they can, because if they have the tools, they want to get rid of it right off the bat. And I've had a couple games where it's been completely game ending to just play Shenra on turn 1, pass it back to them, then they spend their turn trying to kill Shenra, and you give it a Pearl's Choice to give it +1/+1 in Aegis, and blanking their entire turn, and then being able to proc mastery early. It's just a concede at that point, because there's nothing they can do. But you got to be careful, because sometimes you are taking a turn off to do that, so it's a balance. But something to look out for is it may be worth taking a turn off to protect Shenra, but it depends on the situation. Ghostblade Outcast, 1/1 Exalted Lifesteal. Not a super powerful unit, but it helps you curve out a little bit. And you also a lot of times get in a free attack, because if you go this into Crown Watch Paladin or this into Verret, they don't really want to block your Outcast, because you just get a free attack, and if they block it, you just give your Aegis or your Verret +1/+1 in Lifesteal, which is very good. So gives you some free attacks as well. So 1-drops that can attack freely, pretty powerful. Then you have your really powerful 2-drops here. You've got Crown Watch Paladin, a 2/2 Aegis Warcry. The 2/2 body always a little small, but you're able to pump it up with Ghostblade Outcast, with Perul's Choice, with Finest Hour, a lot of different things. Just really makes this deck sing. And then late in the game, you can put a Daring Griffin on it, or something else to really pump it up and give it flying, and all of a sudden it becomes a really hard to deal with unit, especially for the control decks. Playing out 2 or 3 of these and having their removal get blanked is pretty great. Varret's your other 2-drop. Varret's really powerful, of course. A lot of decks wish they could play this. It's colorless, so a lot of decks can, but this is probably the deck that takes advantage of it the best, this or Stone Scar. You play it out on curve, you have combat tricks to back it up, and then it kind of draws the attention because your opponent has to deal with Varret, or else it's going to get out of hand and they're going to lose the game. But when they spend their time and resources dealing with Varret, you're going off with Shenron, Crownwatch Paladin, and Outcast, so it allows you to keep the pressure on. You have your Smuggler. This Smuggler is very good in this deck because of the Aegis. You almost always want to trigger Onslaught if you can to give both yourself and this unit Aegis. Allows you to put weapons on this later, or combat tricks. Just allows, especially against the control decks, just having another Aegis unit to blank their wraths is really important, and of course allows you to go to the market. We talked about Hooru Pacifier already. Incredibly powerful. Just be careful with the weapons clause if you want to play this card, but very powerful card. And then your last 3-drop is Temple Shihan. This card's pretty solid. We're only running 3 of in this deck because it's not. It's 3 power. It's a little more expensive. It's one of the weaker cards, but it's still very powerful. Especially both abilities. So the summon to play an inferiority complex against aggro decks, that's really good. Being able to, or against time decks too, taking out one of their power producers is pretty nice, and then it can just block them. But the Inspire ability to give your units flying, if this sticks around and you draw, a Varret with flying is incredible. A Shenron with flying is great. A Crownwatch Paladin is great. Pretty much all your units really benefit from having that flying clause, so Temple Shihan can be pretty powerful there. Daring Griffin, just incredibly powerful card. 3/2 flying, exalted, reckless, and when the enemy player plays a spell, sacrifice to negate it. This is incredibly powerful against the control decks because you can play it the turn before Shenra speaks or before their big play, counter it, and then put the 3/2 flying on one of your other units. It's just insane. It's good against the Stone Scar decks because they have spot removal, and being able to put this the 3/2 weapon on one of your Aegis units is great. Really powerful. Sets up some really incredible game states with Daring Griffin. Again, just be careful with Pacifier. And then you have kind of a collection of high cost spells. So there's a variety of things you can play in this spot. For this one, I'm playing 2 Anya and 2 Sodi just to diversify a little bit. Anya's pretty sweet, 4 for 5. With Pledge, which sometimes comes up to smooth out your power and your influence at the beginning of the game, but oftentimes I try not to if I can help it. Summon stun an enemy unit and stays stunned as long as you have Anya, and importantly, Renown gives it +2/+2 in Aegis, and you can Renown from things like Finest Hour or Savagery or Perul's Choice, but you can also Renown off of him Exalted. So I think your opponents sometimes forget about that. So if you do lose an Exalted unit in combat, that actually goes on to Anya and gives her the +2/+2 in Aegis. So pretty powerful there. And then lastly, Sodi, which we talked about, incredibly powerful card. So the top end, you want to keep your top end a little bit light because this is a tempo deck. Unless you're playing the slower version, you do want to kind of limit the amount of 5-drops you have because you really want to curve out 1, 2, 3. You have a pair of attachments here, Avagraft and Permafrost. These are searchable by Perul's Choice. So the first version here is draw a curse from your choice that you haven't played that game. So you can go get Permafrost or Avagraft, which is nice. You don't have to have them in your hand. Permafrost, just to deal with pesky units. Avagraft is especially useful against Incarnus, being able to remove all the Incarnuses essentially. And Permafrost, of course, to get through a pesky unit if they have a pesky blocker for you. Then your spells, Finest Hour, really, really good in this deck, being able to trigger the help with, so, win combat, help with mastery, trigger Anya, just does everything you want in this deck. And as I said before, don't be afraid to play this defensively if you need to. A lot of times if you get ahead early, your opponent is going to rely on a big combat step or a big removal step, big removal spell in order to stabilize and take care of your units. And a lot of times you can just end the game by blowing them out with Finest Hour. Sometimes if you have 2 Finest Hour, you don't just throw them away. You might want to save them for a time when they line up a combat trick and expect to blow it out, and you can 2-for-1 them, or even 2-for-2 them is fine if you're winning your combat and you keep your unit around, especially if you do it in a way that keeps one of your mastery units around, allows them to do damage at the same time. Can really honestly just be game ending at that time. Seek Power to help smooth things out in the deck. Savagery is probably my least favorite card in the deck, but it's something that's just kind of essential to have. It just gives you some flexibility and an out. There's a couple cool things you can do with this. Obviously, you can take care of a pesky unit. That's kind of the level 1. But because this has Killer and Overwhelm, what you can do a lot of times is, especially against something like Cultists, is if you're at a board stall or a Legion too, if you're in a board stall and you just have a huge unit that you've pumped up with Exalted, or you've put Finest Hour on it, or you put a weapon on it, a lot of different ways that you can do that. You might end up with a big unit that they're just going to chump block or can't get through their their board full of creatures. What you can do is you can just play Savagery with the Killer and the Overwhelm and attack through, and because it has Overwhelm, let's say it's a 12 power unit that you attack their one toughness guy, and it does the 11 damage through. So it can be powerful there, but doesn't come up too often. Perul's Choice, as we talked about, +1/+1 in Aegis to one of your units, again, can just be game-breaking in decks that relying on removal or draw a curse that from your deck at the Permafrost or the Avagraft, so depending on the matchup there. You've got emblems here. Those are both very powerful. One cool thing about the emblem, the Primal Emblem, is that it gives you a 3/1 elemental with Aegis, but if you have Temple Sheehan out, units you draw get flying. That does count as a drawn unit, so you will get a 3/1 flying Aegis, which is very powerful, so be aware of that. In this version, I actually probably should take out these Emerald coins. It's nice with the Onslaught to play a weapon on your Aegis guys, but it can be awkward with the power the Hooru pacifier. So if you're playing without the pacifiers, I would play these. If you're playing with the pacifiers, I would probably take these out, actually. All right, and then the market. There's a lot of different market slots. I don't think this market is ideal, honestly. I would probably switch some of these things up. If you want help with the Cultist matchup, there's a couple options. You can play Gavel, and you can grab that. Gavel's okay against Cultists because it does shut off their recursion, shuts off their early game. The problem with just relying on Gavel is that a lot of their game comes down to Xenon Temple and Incarnus and Carvet, and this card just really doesn't do anything against those cards. So I think it is effective at shutting off the early game and putting them into having to rely on their top end in order to beat you, which is nice, but it does not just straight up beat them because they do have the more powerful cards. So that's a little bit iffy, but I have it in here for now. But you need another way to beat Cultists other than just the Gavel. It's not an instant win. We'll skip down to Crystallize then. This is the other way to deal with both Elysian and Cultist, is to basically stun and deal 1 damage to every unit. You're able to push through damage that way. So if you get into a board stall, this wins board stalls. Any matchup where you think there's going to be a board stall, that's a good choice. I have 2 edicts in here. You might not need both, but in my experience, having an edict against that hits both the Elysian matchup and the Fire matchups is useful, as well as something that hits the dragons. So having this against Stone Scar is pretty useful as well. And then Bring Down, of course, is the big one that hits the dragons. This is especially good in the control matchups where they're relying on landing a dragon to stop you, or if their Wrath doesn't work, or if it does, and then they play a dragon next turn, preemptively grabbing this from the market and then being able to kill their Carvet end of turn is that can just win the game easily. Again, I don't think this is ideal. I think especially 3 of these spells that essentially do the same thing, this is probably too many. You might want to take one of these out, grab something else. I've seen usually there's a weapon in here, a flying weapon for the more aggro version. I took that out because of the pacifier. But if you're not playing pacifier, you can have a flying weapon in there as well. So a lot of different options there. As I said, you can go a little bit lower to the ground. You can go a little bit more mid-range if you want. There's a lot of different ways to play this, but essentially the core of the deck is very similar for what you're trying to do. All right, so let's hop into a pair of games here. Win or lose, we'll play 2, and we'll see how they go, and hopefully we'll just get some interesting games, and we'll talk through how the deck plays. All right, and then just a quick reminder, we do have a Expedition challenge next week, so next Tuesday, the 17th. So if you want to try out this deck or another one, might be something fun to try out here. So one of the key things about this deck is it does require a good opening hand. You mulligan a lot because you want to find that curve. This is a good curve. We've got a 1-drop into a 2-drop, so we do want to keep this. But you do get some awkward hands where if you draw your 4-drops, your 5-drops, that your deck's not going to do anything. So you have to be really disciplined to mulligan hands that don't have early action, because your deck does need the early action in order to function effectively as you want to. Okay, so Elysian, a pretty decent matchup here, but they are going to be able to stabilize. neutralized, so we're going to need ways to get through here. We are not going to play that out yet. What we're going to do is play out the Verret here, which gives us a nice curve out into 1-2. Again, if they want to block this, that's fine. We'll put the weapon on the Verret. We also have the Finest Hour if we want. All right, so Trailmaker, there we go. We just talked about this. We're going to go ahead and attack with both. I assume they're not going to block. They're not going to. Now I'm going to play the weapon, and I'm actually going to play the weapon onto this. That could be wrong, but what I'm going to do is play the weapon onto here so that if this dies, it actually keeps the pump, so it'll give +2/+2 to the other unit, especially since we have the Finest Hour. Okay, Spell Shaper is pretty good here. That's a nice curve for that. That's another reason that Hooru Pacifier is good against Elysian. Shuts off Sodi Spell Shaper. That's pretty good for them, though. It's a nice turn. They're going to draw, set us back, and actually transform our Varret. So not great for us here. That was pretty effective. So I think here this is a little tough because we want to be efficient and play out probably the Daring Griffin if we want to use all of our power. We could also play the Evangel out, though, and block this. So this is tough. I think the problem is if we play the Daring Griffin and they play a spell, if we attack with this, they can just draw a card. I don't really want them to draw a card. So I'm going to play this a little slow, actually. I'm going to play this out. I'm going to play my power, and then I'm going to pass and keep up Finest Hour. And force them to take action and interact with us. And hopefully we'll be able to eat this, depending on what they do here. We do have to be careful with Ela and Mizo, though, too. If they play that out, yeah, there you go. So this is where you're going to want one of these units from the board. The Edict is really good against Ela and Mizo here. All right, so now we have Daring Griffin, I think. So we have Sodi here. Might want to hold on to Sodi, especially if we have the Finest Hour. So we can either Crown Watch Paladin, keep up Finest Hour, but I think what I want to do is play this out, play Daring Griffin, and keep up Finest Hour. And then what we can do is we can block Ela and Mizo and use Finest Hour here. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use both of these, and then I'm going to put Finest Hour on this. All right, they're going to take care of that. That's okay. We'll put the emblem on this. Now, if this dies, it gets even more onto our other unit. There you go. So we'll do this. Now, hopefully, I just don't have another removal spell. But now we've got a 10-9 flying quick draw lifesteal here, which is going to be pretty good and going to be difficult for our opponent to deal with here. Okay, so we actually have them on a 2-turn clock now, which is nice. Oh, that's pretty nice too. So we'll do this, gain a whole bunch of health, and then I'm actually going to play out the Smuggler here. And let's trade the Paladin for Edict here. And then question is whether we want to play it now or pass. I think we do want to play it now. I don't think they have a good answer for this, so I'm going to play Sodi I'm going to play it on Sodi just to make sure that they can't really draw. That I want to remove options for answers for them here. Now, if they have another Spell Shaper, that's a little tough because it'll bounce this and not put us in great shape. But I think that's really their only option. Okay, so there you go. Yeah, we kind of put the pressure on. You saw the power of Exalted there, being able to move the weapon around onto a unit that's very difficult for our opponent to deal with there. So that was actually a pretty good version. That was a good game to see how the deck functions and why it's so powerful and what it can do. But like I said, it is going to be dependent on your draw. You really want that quick draw out, that curve from 1, 2, 3 like we had there. Yep, so as I mentioned, December 3rd, I'm sorry, I think I said the 17th earlier, but December 3rd, next Tuesday, is going to be the next Expedition Challenge, and I think there's like 1 or 2 more QCPs as well in client in December, so if you want to sign up for one of those, obviously you can do that, and this is one option for a deck you can bring. Okay, this is pretty good hand. 1, 2, 3 on the play is nice. I do think we are probably going to pledge Anya here, because we really don't want to miss our power drops here. And we have enough power where I don't think we need to bank on that 5 drop here. We don't have any combat tricks or anything to get through, which is a little tough, but I'll take the curve any day, and hopefully we can draw into ways to get through. Okay, so starting off with Shenra here, which is nice. Okay, Cultist. Again, tough matchup here, but do what we can do here. So we will attack. And then the question is, this is always a tough one. Do you play the Paladin or the Verret? In this situation, I think I want to play the Verret and kind of force their hand a little bit. They can silence it, but I think getting this out here to be able to basically force this block is where we want to go. I wouldn't want to block with the Paladin. It would kind of give them a free attack, so I wouldn't want to do that here. Okay, this is pretty good, so I'm going to attack with both. I know that they can chump here and buff their power from the high profit, which is not ideal, but I think it's what we got to do. And then the question becomes, okay, so they didn't block there. Okay. So then the question becomes, do we play out Paladin and Outcast, or do we play Hooru Pacifier? I think I'm going to play out Pacifier here. I could see an argument for both, but I think just having this threat that is going to be good here. All right, so they're going to take out the Shenra with Vara's favor. That is unfortunate. We didn't have a way to protect it anyway. That kind of stinks, but we do what we got to do here. As I mentioned, this matchup is tough, but I think Hooru is one of the better decks against Cultists, but I don't know about this start. We don't have the Aegis, unfortunately. So we could attack with Varret and get 2 more mastery, but that does... There's stone, which isn't great, but it does stop them from getting the stone value later. They could also just block with high profit and get that too. I think we'll attack. If they want to get the Gargoyle out of this, maybe we can kill it with Sodi a turn after. So I think that's okay. I think we attack with both. All right. They're going to attack there. That's fine. They are going to get +1 power here, which is kind of unfortunate, but I think we want to do that still. I am not going to decimate here because I do want to be able to hit Sodi. That is one other thing about playing the more expensive cells is you don't want to decimate quite as much. All right, there's Carvet. So what we're going to do here... Oh, I wish we had the power there. That's unfortunate. Really wanted to be able to use the Sodi to kill the Carvet. We can't now, and we can't really attack, so we're just going to have a pass back. We really want an undepleted power so that we can kill the Carvet with Sodi. We would have to suicide something in. That's unfortunately, we could have attacked with our Shenra before, but they took care of that. So now we're in trouble. Their cultists also have Exalted now, which is tough. Okay. That's still okay. All right, that's going to miss. So we really need an undepleted power here. Then we'll probably just suicide in our 1/1. That's not great. This is where you get into a little bit awkward relationship here with the Hooru Pacifier, because we could play it, but then they just don't attack. We have to suicide into the 4/5, and we can't play the weapon. So the other option is suiciding in the Pacifier, and then playing the Daring Griffin after, so that we can kill it and put it on like Varret or the Aegis unit, which is possible, but I feel like that's giving up too much value. Yeah, that's tough. Could be correct, but I don't think we want to throw away one of our best units, which is also shutting off their Exalted. We're basically killing that and that to be able to do it. Although it would have shut off the Xenon Temple. All right, gonna give that killer, which is fine. Now the weapon can't be played. I don't know if our opponent knew that or not, so they couldn't get the killer chain going, which is probably what they wanted to do there, because weapons can't be played. That would be really powerful if you could do the killer chain and pass that on to something else and get killer, but you can't because of the pacifier. So, all right. So we're going to attack a Carvet here. Of course, we're not going to block. We really want this undepleted power so we can kill the Carvet with Sodi. It's not great, but it's okay. We can get Bring Down. I don't think we want Gavel at this point. So I think we probably get Bring Down. I think that's probably our best option. Could grab Gavel, but I don't think we want that at this point. Yeah. All right, so we're going to attack in. They could have the sack and deal minus, but not much we can do about that. We don't want to suicide this in because we can't play the unit, so we'll do that. Now, you do need to get Xenon Temple off the board because Xenon Temple is incredibly powerful. Okay, so normally you give Aegis here, but I'm wondering if we just want to make the big one with Overwhelm, which makes it more likely that we're able to hit the Xenon Temple. It's possible. Yeah, that might not be right, but I'm going to go with that just so we have the best possible chance to kill the Xenon Temple. All right, we're going to toss one Sodi because we don't need both, and we're going to grab Bring Down for that Carvet. Of course, if we have undepleted power, we can get the Carvet anyway. All right, Augury here. All right, Incarnus is also a problem. See, this is where the Cultist deck is really powerful. We weren't able to get fast enough on them, and their late game with the Incarnus and the Carvet is going to be a little much for us. We may have to use the Bring Down to silence the Incarnus, since we don't have like a lot of spot removal. We could also get Permafrost or Avagraft, but we don't want to do that necessarily. If we can attack in and use Sodi to kill the Carvet, that would be nice. Bring Down being fast is also nice because these units have Overwhelm. We can attack into the Carvet if we wanted to. I'd have to think about that and then Bring Down it mid-combat and be able to deal all the damage to the Xenon Temple. So it's possible. So we got to decide if we're going to do that. Or we could just Bring Down pre-combat. Yeah, it's probably just better to do it pre-combat. Now, they're going to have a removal spell, so if we Bring Down, they can sack something to kill something. I actually don't know if it's better to do this pre-combat or not. I'm just going to do it now. I don't know if it's better to do it pre-combat or not. They're going to sack it in response. Oh, no, okay. Sure. That's unfortunate. So we're going to attack in with this and this. And maybe even this 2. That's 9. Sure. We're running out of time here, so I'm just going to attack with all of it. Okay. Attack with just the Carvet. That's fine too. We're going to pump this. Ooh, do they have another removal spell? They have 2. Okay, that's fine. What happened to our finest hour? Was that a bug? Did our finest hour just not go off? Okay, well, unless I'm missing something, I think that was just a bug, that our finest hour just didn't happen. Otherwise, we would have killed the Carvet and dealt the damage to the Xenon Temple. So, yeah, we're going to lose this one, obviously. But unless I'm missing something, let me know in the comments. Did I just miss something in our finest hour? I don't see it anywhere. It just disappeared. And it didn't win us the combat, so I don't know what happened there. Okay, so we're going to lose this one, of course, but you saw how the deck played. Again, Cultist is still probably the better deck. Nothing we can really do about that, but we gave it our all, and you saw in the first game, I think, was a better representation of how the deck is. Still tough. Cultist is a tough matchup for anyone, but I think you got some decent matchup here. So if we had that finest hour, it might have been a little closer, but oh well. All right, so that'll be it. I'm going to concede this one, but hopefully you got to see how the deck plays out. Like I said, there's a couple different ways to play that out. So take a look at the different deck options. You can find some of them on Warcry. You can also find them in the description down below. But there's the more aggressive version, more aggressive tempo Aegis version. There's this kind of middle version, which I like, but you do have a little bit of awkwardness with the Pacifier and the Griffin. And then there's more control version or mid-range version where you rely more on your Sodis and your pacifiers and your Seraphs, and you don't really play the aggro tempo version. So hope you'd enjoy. Please give us a like, give us a follow, subscribe here on YouTube, check us out on Twitch. The next tournament is Tuesday, December 3rd. It'll be Expedition Challenge, so try out one of these decks. Feel free to comment, leave any feedback. We'd love to hear from you, and hope to see you all soon. Thanks. Have fun.